Picture Columbus boldly sailing toward the edge of the world, teetering like a marble about to slip off a coffee table. At least, that's the myth in a nutshell. Legend casts him as a lone genius, defying a chorus of medieval flat-earthers, his crew gripping the rigging as if gravity might forget them. In reality, by 1492, most educated Europeans already knew the Earth was round. Aristotle, Eratosthenes, and their toga-wearing science squad had hammered that out centuries before. The real debate wasn't flat Earth. It was Earth's size. Was it a cozy soccer ball or a hulking beach ball? Columbus, ever the optimist, or perhaps math-impaired, shrunk the globe in his calculations, confident Asia would appear after a quick westward hop. Spoiler alert, it was the Caribbean, not Cathay, and he was fresh out of spring rolls. The skeptics weren't flat earthers. They just figured he'd run out of snacks before he ran out of ocean. Columbus didn't fall off the map, he just crashed an entirely different party. So, did he prove the world was round? Not quite. He proved you can score royal funding with dodgy math and a killer elevator pitch. Cheers, Queen Isabella! Following the belief in his proof of Earth's roundness, Columbus ventured west and ultimately reached the Americas. If you imagine Christopher Columbus casually strolling ashore and immediately asking for directions to Times Square, think again. It's a persistent myth. Columbus, with his nautical flair and a GPS that might as well have been a magic 8-ball, discovered what we now call the United States. In reality, the only thing Columbus discovered was that he was nowhere near his intended destination, and definitely not on the American mainland. His 1492 Eureka moment landed him in the Bahamas, on an island he christened San Salvador. Not Florida, not New York, and certainly not the place that hawks cheap I Heart New York t-shirts. Columbus's voyages mostly bounced between Caribbean islands and grazed the coasts of Central and South America. The contiguous U.S. Nope, those shores remained untouched. His boat shoes stayed dry. Meanwhile, Vikings had already checked Newfoundland off their travel bucket list centuries earlier, and millions of indigenous Americans had been there way before, with reservations, and not the dinner kind. Still, Columbus's arrival did kick off the age of European exploration, which changed everything. So while America celebrates Columbus Day, remember, we're partying for the guy who essentially ghosted the whole country. America got its name from Amerigo Vespucci, while Columbus scored a city in Ohio and a holiday mostly famous for controversy. Despite landing in America, it was long held that Columbus was the first European to arrive there. Did you know Columbus was basically the celebrity guest star in the saga of European visits to the Americas? Popular legend casts him as the OG explorer who bravely discovered America in 1492. But that's like crediting the last guest at a potluck with inventing casserole. The myth conveniently snubs the earlier transatlantic VIPS, the Vikings. Leif Erikson and his Norse crew were already living large in North America around the year 1000, setting up shop in what's now Newfoundland. Archaeologists later uncovered L'Anse aux Meadows, a sort of Viking Airbnb, proving they weren't just lost sailors, but actual settlers, centuries before Columbus even figured out where to find his socks. Sure, there are wilder theories about other Old World visitors, but the Vikings hold the only confirmed guest pass. So Columbus was basically 500 years fashionably late. No gold star for punctuality. But hey, his European PR team spun the slickest discovery campaign ever, leaving Leif stuck with minor historical footnotes and maybe a parade or two, if he's lucky. Columbus's voyage was motivated by a determined goal to find America by sailing westward. Who decides to cross a giant, uncharted ocean just because they ran out of spices? Apparently, Christopher Columbus. Professional explorer, amateur cartographer, world-class guesser. Forget those grade school dioramas. Columbus wasn't dreaming of a new world. He was chasing a fast track to Asian spice riches. By 1492, most scholars already agreed the Earth was round. The real debate was whether it was a petite orange or a massive pumpkin. Columbus, ever the optimist or the original wing-it innovator, convinced himself Asia was just a short sail west. Spain, not exactly thrilled with his questionable GPS skills, agreed to sponsor him after some royal eye-rolling and negotiations that felt more like a reality show showdown. Armed with 3 ships, a handful of supplies, and a stack of prayers, he set off into weeks of Atlantic guesswork, mutinous whispers, and sea monsters, aka nervous sailor imaginations. Now imagine pitching your boss a quest based on a map scribbled after bedtime. That's innovation, or something very close. After his voyages, Columbus was remembered as a wealthy and celebrated hero. Picture Columbus lounging on a golden throne, goblet in hand, adored by all. Well, not quite. The popular myth has him spending his twilight years swimming through piles of gold like Scrooge McDuck after a headline-grabbing voyage. For centuries, Renaissance artists painted him as Spain's hottest celebrity, basking in royal limelight. But here's a navigational correction. After his big splash, Columbus sailed into seriously choppy waters. Far from living like a king, he lost his governorship due to mismanagement and outright brutality, basically fired on his day off. He even got arrested, which isn't exactly how you nail Explorer of the Year. His bank account? Less New World riches, more empty world blues. Those legendary treasures? IOUs piled higher than the Pinta's sails. In reality, he spent his final years slogging through lawsuits and paperwork for money that stubbornly stayed hypothetical. He died not in a palace, but a modest house. Certainly not rolling in gold. Ironically, history waited centuries before rolling out the red carpet for him. Columbus's finale? Less golden glory, more bureaucratic blues. However, not everyone agreed with Columbus's plans. Many thought his voyage was foolish. Imagine announcing you're sailing west to reach the east. No GPS, just pure, unfiltered guts. Picture Columbus at court, arms wide, pitching his wild plan. Let's sail into the unknown and find Asia. The royal advisors exchange looks so sharp you can almost hear their necks crack. Most experts predict he'll either tumble off the edge of the world or roast under an angry sun. Medieval Europe still clings to maps dotted with dragons and bold warnings. Here be monsters. Not exactly Yelp's 5-star review. Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand listen politely while courtiers in the back row discreetly stifle snickers. To the public, Columbus is the punchline to every tavern quiz. Will Chris bring back spices or become fish food? In the late 1400s, going west didn't mean manifest destiny. It meant manifest insanity. If Columbus had a LinkedIn, his endorsements would read, "Expert in delusion." But undeterred, Columbus keeps angling for royal gold, sidling up to power and whispering, "Trust me." And somehow, just enough skeptics become curious enough to let the sails unfurl. Despite skepticism, Columbus purportedly showed respect towards the indigenous peoples he encountered. Was Columbus a beacon of mutual respect, or just a sailor hopelessly lost in both direction and decorum? Legend paints him as history's friendliest tourist, discovering the Americas as if the locals had all been politely waiting by the shore, eager for him to plant his flag and ask, "By the way, where's the nearest ATM?" Supposedly, he and the natives swapped pleasantries, trinkets, and warm smiles. A real kumbaya moment. But historians with functioning reading glasses beg to differ. Crack open Columbus's own diaries and the Spanish archives, and the scene shifts from postcard perfect to a police blotter. He openly described the indigenous people as prime candidates for exploitation, not exactly the makings of a new BFF club. In Hispaniola, he introduced forced tribute and brutal punishments. Resistance? Met with swords, not handshakes. Apparently, Columbus's golden rule was more like, whoever has the gold makes the rules. If that's his version of respect, I dread to imagine what he considered rude. The collapse of local populations wasn't just tragic, it's the worst peaceful first contact story since that awkward office Secret Santa where no one wanted to participate. So let's just say the respectful explorer legend belongs in the same dusty drawer as flat earth maps and unicorn bones. His respect was accompanied by commanding ships that were seen as grand and mighty vessels. Picture Columbus sailing the ocean blue on ships so enormous they'd make cruise liners jealous, right? That's the fantasy anyway. Plucky explorers lounging on the deck of some majestic palace at sea, sipping grog and waving to dolphins. Popular belief paints Columbus's ships as grand, gun-bristling leviathans, fit for a king. or at least the next Pirates of the Caribbean sequel. But reality chuckles at such cinematic luxury. The Niña and the Pinta? Humble little caravels, barely bigger than your average city bus. And Columbus's pride and joy, the Santa Maria, technically a now and a modest 70 feet long. If these ships got any cozier, Columbus's crew would have smashed the world record for group hugs, packed tighter than socks in a suitcase, and boasting hygiene levels somewhere below medieval street. Mutiny sometimes looked like the tastier option. So next time you imagine Columbus's mighty fleet, think 3 plucky floating minivans, not a scene from Titanic. History, less luxury cruise, more hope you like your neighbors. Upon arrival, Columbus mistakenly named the indigenous people Indians, thinking he had reached India. Columbus named the locals Indians because, spoiler alert, GPS wasn't exactly a thing in 1492. Armed with a medieval map and a pocket full of misplaced confidence, Christopher Columbus stumbled onto a Bahamian beach, completely convinced he'd landed in India. Who needs accuracy when you've got swagger and zero sense of direction? Refusing to ask for directions or admit a mistake, Columbus christened the bewildered locals Indians. Spoiler, they weren't even close. This blunder stuck like pirate glue. European explorers, map-makers, and armchair geographers ran wild with the mix-up, churning out atlases, journals, and tall tales about the Indies and their so-called Indians. Meanwhile, India was nowhere near the scene, probably sipping tea and wondering how it suddenly became a global celebrity. Eventually, indigenous Americans had to politely clarify, "Actually, we're not Indian, thanks." Yet the label endures, a testament to one sailor's legendary directional blunder and the world's stubborn refusal to update its travel brochures. This misnaming became a historical detail commemorated on Columbus Day. Every October, Americans dust off their tricorner hats and crown Columbus as the original party planner. You'd think Columbus Day was some ancient, universally adored fiesta, complete with pinta-shaped confetti and bottomless marinara bowls. Not quite. Despite what your local department store implies, Columbus Day only scored federal holiday status in 1937, and even then, not everyone was eager to whip up a Genoan cake. Before Congress got on board, the real celebrations were mostly Italian-American communities, eager to sprinkle a little extra pride onto a calendar strangely short on chances to wave red, white, and green. Meanwhile, many states just preferred raking leaves, sipping pumpkin spice, and letting Columbus sail quietly past. As the years rolled on, critics, loudest among them indigenous voices, started tossing less confetti and more pointed questions at Columbus's legacy. Today, several states honor Indigenous Peoples Day instead, turning the calendar into something resembling a diplomatic tightrope. But don't worry, parades still march on and mattress sales remain stubbornly unshaken, because if Columbus truly discovered America, then my uncle definitely discovered sliced bread at last year's BBQ. The celebration of Columbus Day reflected the universal admiration he received during his lifetime. If you picture Columbus's homecoming as a victory parade, complete with cheers and confetti showers, prepare for a history check. The classic image casts him as a rock star explorer, adored like Beyoncé headlining Coachella. Reality? His fan club was way smaller and full of raised eyebrows. Sure, his discovery earned some early glory, but it also unleashed a tsunami of controversy. Spanish court officials greeted him with skepticism, constantly side-eyeing his grand claims and questionable leadership. Instead of basking in fame, Columbus was collecting angry Yelp reviews from irked nobles and making a few relentless enemies along the way. By 1500, he'd been arrested. Yes, arrested, and hauled back to Spain in chains, charged with mismanagement, corruption, and brutality. Religious and political heavyweights openly called him out. And public opinion? Let's just say it was firmly in the "it's complicated" zone. His reputation flipped on court gossip and whether or not he actually brought home any gold. Bottom line, Columbus universal fan status? Mostly fictional. Gold was golden, Columbus. Not so much. Part of his acclaim was due to his possession of detailed maps related to his discoveries. Did Christopher Columbus really smuggle secret maps of the New World in his sea chest? Or is this just another tall tale tangled in salty legend? Let's weigh anchor and navigate straight into the fog of fiction. Some say Columbus sneakily toted ancient charts revealing the Americas, turning him from bold explorer into the world geography class spoilers poster child. This spicy myths served up by conspiracy buffs, pseudo-historians, and anyone convinced history's more riveting with a juicy plot twist. Here's the crash-landing truth. Columbus set sail west, not clutching an insider's guide to the Bahamas. The closest thing he had to a map was probably a restaurant menu from a Genoa tapas bar, but because he thought the Earth was a lot smaller than reality would later show. 15th century map-making was basically guesswork sprinkled with hopeful doodles. Navigators relied more on napkin sketches than any proto-GPS. The best Columbus could hope for was Asia lurking just beyond the Atlantic's horizon. Not a continent teeming with iguanas and future spring breakers. Yet the myth keeps sailing on, buoyed by our craving for tales of genius underdogs armed with secret knowledge. Relax. Columbus did stumble onto new lands. For Europeans, at least. But it was far more oops, wrong address than behold my master plan. These maps supported the notion that Columbus brought only positive change to the Americas. Was Columbus really the Mr. Rogers the New World never knew it needed, or just history hopped up on a sugar rush? For centuries, the popular tale cast our Genoese hero as the original influencer, landing in the Americas to gift-wrap progress, Christianity, and a sampler platter of European government. Basically, all the 15th century sales pitch promises except free Wi-Fi. But let's set sail into reality. Columbus didn't just bring gifts, he hauled in party favors nobody RSVP'd to, like smallpox, measles, and enough swords to start a very deadly knife fight. This so-called goodwill tour unleashed tidal waves of violence, forced labor, and sparked the biggest extractive scavenger hunt the continent had ever seen. Bonus legacy: Columbus kick-started the first transatlantic slave shipments in the Americas, setting a grim high score for centuries of suffering to come. If that's positive change, then hurricanes are just breezes with attitude. Calling Columbus a force for good is like thanking a tornado for redecorating your living room, which explains how the legend conveniently sweeps the chaos he unleashed under the rug. Now let's cross the bridge to what this really meant for the indigenous world. It was believed that Columbus immediately realized the significance of discovering a new continent. Picture Columbus scanning the sandy shores and declaring, "Aha! New land for the ledger! He's finally spotted land after weeks at sea." Translation: 3 hats have been dramatically adjusted, and the ship's menu of salted fish and mutiny is getting stale. The crew's excitement rivals only their desperate craving for, say, an orange. Eagerly, Columbus unfurls a map that looks like it was sketched by an overenthusiastic child and confidently announces he's landed in Asia. Spoiler alert, he's basically GPS recalculating in human form. Myth has it that Chris instantly knew he'd found an unknown continent. The truth? For years, he insisted he'd merely brushed the outskirts of Asia. Meanwhile, back in Europe, rumors spread faster than a ship with a tailwind. Medieval Twitter at its finest. Columbus, the only guy who could get lost, discover something huge, and still insist he was on the right path. Eventually, European cartographers played history's longest game of guess that location, until they finally, and probably grudgingly, connected the dots. This understanding helped inspire Italian Americans, who have always revered Columbus. Just say Italian hero, and most folks picture a guy wearing a cape stitched from pizza toppings, not the guy in the history books, Christopher Columbus. Yet somehow, old Chris has become the perennial poster boy for Italian-American pride. Thanks to a blitz of parades, statues, and the occasional suspiciously towering hat, Columbus planted himself firmly in the public imagination as the ultimate Italian export, right after espresso and melodramatic hand gestures. Here's the plot twist. Early Italian immigrants actually kept their distance. They cheered for local saints, family legends, or any ancestor whose boldest voyage was a daring dash across the street to snag a cannoli. Columbus's star only rose among Italian Americans in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, just in time for an epic PR makeover. Definitely not straight from the old country recipe. Facing fierce anti-Italian prejudice, communities embraced Columbus the way they might adopt spaghetti tacos. Italian, but mostly by enthusiastic association. So if Columbus truly topped Nana's hero list, wouldn't he have a bobblehead nestled next to her Virgin Mary? The real story is that Columbus's craze was less about ancient reverence and more about adaptation. You could say he got his invite to the Italian-American party right when the family needed a little good press. Moreover, Columbus documented his journeys, writing the first accounts of the New World. Imagine stumbling upon an entire new continent and being the first to write an awkward travel review about it. That's the legend of Christopher Columbus, the OG explorer who supposedly penned the world's very first "Wish You Were Here" postcard from the Americas. Spoiler alert, while Columbus often gets credit for the original written account, the Americas were hardly a blank page. Indigenous peoples had been chronicling their histories for centuries, just not in European tourist guide format. And let's not overlook the Vikings, especially Leif Erikson, who left behind some Stone Age graffiti and sketchy trip notes centuries before Columbus ever missed his exit for India. Columbus's journals? More self-promo than solid fact, a mashup of travel diary and a desperate Kickstarter pitch. Jumbled geography, vague mentions of gold, and zero nods to the locals' well-established records. Columbus was basically the original Yelp reviewer. Beds are hard, people are friendly, still no gold. If first account means cheerfully ignoring the voices already on site, he was an expert. Fact-checking? Let's just say his sense of direction and accuracy were equally unreliable.